In this next tutorial on duplicating and organizing objects, we're going to use this office chair to help demonstrate duplicating groups of items. So let's go ahead and pull up the start file. Here's a model I created of this office chair, and it's perfect for kind of figuring out how to organize objects so that you can then duplicate them in a controllable way. So the first thing that we need to do is figure out how to take all of these disparate parts and put them into sort of logical structure. One of the goals that we're eventually going to have is sort of the ability to articulate different parts of it, considering that the chair in the real world would be able to move across the floor and also have the seat components swivel. Since we've asked ourselves what it is that we're going to be duplicating, in this case it's a group, we have a couple of options available to us. We have collections and collections instances, and we have parenting. Then we have object on object instances. That's more specialized. So we're going to work initially with parenting, but then I'm going to show you how we can use collections and parenting as sort of a mixed mechanism for working with this chair. And the first thing that we need to do is organize it into logical groups. We're going to use empties as part of our parenting approach. So I'm going to come over and we're going to add an initial empty, and we'll call this one top parts, and then we'll do this again, add empty. We'll call this one two bottom parts, or something descriptive like that. These are pretty enormous, so I will remove the enormity by taking the size down just a little bit. Let's go ahead and parent the top parts first. I'm in select box mode, so I can just drag across those. I'm getting this part too because it's attached to the base plate, which is really part of the top components. Come over to the selected elements, hold the Shift key, and drag those on top parts empty. Let's work on the bottom parts now. But we want to kind of work from a bottom-up approach. We have these wheel components that we're going to be replicating. Let's sort of organize those first. They need to be parented around a position where they can rotate, which is on this cylindrical component. With that selected, press Shift and S, do a cursor to selected, and then we're going to do a Shift A, add an empty. It's going to be enormous, so let's take this down to 5 inches, which is still pretty big, but that's okay. So let's first name this, and we're going to call this wheel. There we go. So I'm going to manually select this. I'm holding the Shift key down to carefully select those three components. And then finally select that parent object here in the 3D viewport. The other way to parent is to bring up the context menu, come down to parent, and we're just simply going to do the first option, object. And it takes that last yellow selected object, which is the active object, and parents everything to that. So we've got two names that are the same, so it renamed the first one right there. So I'm going to rename this. We're going to call that wheel 1. And then I'm going to take this, hold the Shift key, and drag that into the bottom parts empty, and then the last couple of objects right here, Shift key, and we're going to drag those in also. So we've now got this parenting setup, but our goal is to replicate more of these wheels and then basically have everything act as a unit. Now we need to replicate the wheels. The 3D cursor is not in the position that I want. It needs to be at the center of the rotation for all of the wheels in order to replicate them. Press Shift S, cursor to world origin, and when I select the empty for the wheels, its pivot point is right there at the selected object, but we need it to be here at the rotation center. Press the period key and take that to the 3D cursor's location. Now we can replicate around that center point, but we need to remember to select all of the objects that are parented to wheel 1, do a select hierarchy, and then press Option D to do a duplicate linked. But we want to rotate, not move, so press the R key, and then we want to rotate around the Z axis only. And then type in 72 for 72 degrees and click. Now that we've gotten that operation done, press Shift R a couple more times to give us the duplicates that we need. Those are all duplicate linked. So each of the individual objects are linked together as instances, so we can edit one object and that will be reflected on all the other objects. If you want to select an entire group that's parented to an item, you can select the individual component. Now this is a benefit, but it's also sort of a negative of this approach. In order to get to the parent object, which may not be readily selectable or visible, you would press Shift-G, or you would just come up to Select, go down to Select Group, and Parent. So that's sort of the menu hierarchy of where you would find it. But you just press Shift and G, and then it gets that parent item. If I press Shift and G again, then it would just go back up to the next higher up part of the hierarchy. So this mechanism has advantages and disadvantages. A really big advantage is that, again, you can take all of these individual components and pose them quite easily. The other big advantage is that you can directly select an object in order to gain access to the texture in order to change that. So the material that's applied to here is the same material that's applied to the other one. Changing either reflects on the other. So that's an easy aspect of this. A downside of this approach is that if I need to add an object to my grouping, that addition won't propagate to any of the other duplicates. So that's a downside. I really like this one because there's fairly low overhead to setting this up. But now we're going to look at a mechanism that uses collection instances in combination with parenting to give us a little bit more flexibility in terms of propagating changes to groups of objects. So let's approach this from the standpoint of using collections now. I'm going to remove the duplicate. Let's come back over to the front. We need to come up to the master collection and add a new collection that we'll also call office chair. And in office chair, we need to put two collections that will become one top parts and the other is two bottom parts, just like we have in our existing hierarchy. Now we need to move the items that we already have down here. So I'll expand that out, grab these items, and we want to just move them up into top parts. But notice what happens. It leaves these grayed out references down here. What's happening is that it's moved the actual items from a hierarchical standpoint in the outliner into these collections, but the positions are referenced down here in the three-dimensional space. Remember, collections are just outliner organizational features. So what we need to do is we need to actually remove these so we can organize this a little bit better. I'm going to select all of these items, come up to Object, Parent, do a Clear and Keep Transform, and that will remove them. It'll remove the reference. I'm going to take this, move it kind of back up where we had the other one, because that's actually a good reference position. Press Shift and S, do Cursor to Selected. But then we can delete it because we don't need that anymore. What we're now going to do is come up to the top parts collection, and now we're going to create a collection instance to put into that place. So we will come down to the collection properties, and we need to do an instance from offset to that new cursor location, set offset from cursor, and then come up here and do instance to scene. So now we can actually turn off this collection, and we move the collection instance up to the main scene. We want it to be at the same level as the parent that we're about to put it inside of, which is the office chair empty. So now take this, hold the Shift key and drop it into place. So now this is referencing as a group all the components that are inside of here. Now let's think about this for a minute before we move too much further. We have a collection called office chair, and then we also have a parent office chair. If we collapse these, they're both at the same level. But really, this office chair collection is going to be the master collection that contains both the parts and full duplicates of all of our chairs. So I'm going to rename this office chairs to be plural, and then I'm going to take this office chair and let's do a select hierarchy so everything within inside of that moves inside of this collection. So any duplicates we make of the office chair are going to be housed within this one primary collection. And then what I'm going to do is add one more collection inside of office chairs that we're going to call source. So this is typically how I do it. Let's turn back on this one main collection here. Both of the one top parts and the two bottom parts collections, we're going to move inside of source to really kind of help differentiate them. And this is the only thing that you'll need to turn on or off once we get duplicates going. Okay, so let's come back in here now and let's kind of reorganize this bottom part. So all of these bottom parts that are parented to this, we don't need to be parented anymore, but we are going to keep this empty there. Come back over into the main viewport, Option P, clear and keep transform. And then we've got all these duplicates of the wheels. In empties, we don't need those anymore because we're going to replicate that. So we're going to do delete hierarchy. And then we're going to take everything and move it back inside. So let's take wheel frame and hydraulic tube into the bottom parts. And we'll take the wheel components, select hierarchy, moved into bottom parts. So everything is sort of reorganized here. And then we need to take out from the parenting these components from the wheel. So clear and keep transform. And then we're just going to remove X key that. So now we just come back over here, M key, new collection, and we'll call this wheel. And this needs to get put back into the bottom parts. And then we've got these two floating parts. These also need to be inside of a collection, and this will become obvious in just a minute. So let's come over here, create a new collection. We'll call this frame, just something very simple. So everything has been organized into logical chunks of data. So now we need to replicate these and put them into position. So we left the bottom parts empty right there, and we're going to use that. We didn't need to do that for the top because everything was inside of a single collection, and so it wouldn't have made sense to parent a single item under something else. So if we come back to the bottom parts, now we just need to come in and create references for these or instances of these two collections. So we need to, for wheel, we need to come back down and we need to find the center of this tube, Shift S, cursor to selected, and then back at this empty, come down to the collection properties, do our set offset to cursor function, and then we can do an instance to scene. And there it is. I usually come down and change this to something smaller, move this back up to the main level, and then we can parent that, hold the shift key down to the bottom parts empty. So this is going to give us independent control of these two collection components. So we'll do the same thing for frame. I think frame can very easily be at the world origin. So Shift S, cursor to world origin, and then we just do instance to scene. Its default is 0, 0, 0. Bring this back up to office chairs, and then hold the shift key and parent that back down to bottom parts. So this is why we have this still in place, why I reused that. So now we just do this the same way we had done before. Period, pivot point goes to 3D cursor, press Option D to duplicate it, then press R, Z, and 72, click, and Shift R, Shift R, Shift R. And there we have all of the duplicates. Pressing the period key, going back to active element, now I have the ability to, again, independently control the position and orientation of each of the wheels as I need to. But the components inside are still editable as a group. And the great thing is we can add or subtract components. But this is where I'm going to show you something, a little add-on that I want you to add to your system if you haven't. It will really make this easy. Let's go ahead now and take a look that we've got all these collection instance duplicates. Let's close this out. Let's come up to the top to this source, which has all the parts and pieces for everything. And I'm going to turn that off because we have instances now for everything. And now we're able to come in and do our posing and manipulation for the various parts as we need to. But we get into a situation in a more complex scene where we may need to make edits to this, and it's actually kind of a pain to come back in here, turn this back on, and to come hunt down and find out what that original mesh is in order to edit it. Turns out there is an awesome add-on that facilitates this and makes it so much easier. So in add-ons, I'm going to show you, I've typed in edit. There is an add-on called Edit Instanced Collection. And I've actually done a video on this quite some time ago. I'll put a link to it in the video. Go and download it because this is such an awesome add-on. It does exactly one thing, is it adds an editing feature. I've got this little wheel posed at the bottom and I want to edit. I need to make some change to it. What this does is it allows you to press Control, Option, Alt, C, the C key, and it brings you into a new scene environment where the only thing that's present, both in the outliner and in the 3D environment, is that collection. It's the master source collection, and it's untransformed, and that's what's brilliant about it. You may have one of your instances transformed, rotated, scaled, or whatever. This takes you back to its default position inside of the main collection and allows you to edit it. So for instance, I could very easily come in and make a change. Let's say I needed to make some sort of a design change to this, where we've added a sphere, some little component that needs to be here. We can add material for that, black plastic. Let's duplicate that, Option D, X. So we needed to make this little design change. Okay, so we've made that, and now you just come up here to the scenes. It's a little kind of hard to see. Just click the X and it'll drop you back into the main scene. Now all those instances are updated. But it made it so easy because all I needed to do was edit that one collection source and everything updated. And I didn't have to go hunt it down and look for it. It just put it into a separate scene temporarily for us. So we could do the same thing here. Control Option C, and there we are. And then when I'm done editing, making any changes that I need to, I just close that and it comes back to the main scene. And we can have all of those sources hidden so that we don't have to deal with them or have any duplicates. Now I would come over to my main area here if I want to duplicate the chair. In fact, let me take this instance and take that down. It's a bit big. Come to this main parent, do a select hierarchy, Option D, X key. We can move that off to the side, Shift D, and we've got duplicates, and each one is posable. Now you'll see here how I directly selected this instance, but I want to get to the parent so that also the wheels would rotate. Shift G to select the parent, and now I'm able to rotate the parent empty for those as a unit. So this takes a little bit more of a setup, but it gives you greater flexibility. Now there's one potential drawback to this method, and I actually think this is sort of a weakness in how Blender handles collections. If you select it, you don't have the ability to select the subcomponents to make a material change. So for instance, I would need to come in to the master collection to select the object. Control Option Alt C, and now I can select one of the sub-objects and edit the material. Well, that could be a bummer because if you have your viewport renderer going, you may not be able to see the change interactively. So what I will often do in that case is I will just add a mesh, a temporary mesh like this, where I then assign the material that I may want to do a temporary edit to. Let's say it's the fabric. And since I don't want it to appear in the scene, you just come to Object Properties, come down to Ray Visibility, and just turn all those off, and it won't show up in the viewport renderer and it won't show up in final renders, but I can select the material that I want and make editing changes that will reflect across all of these, across all of these instances. So here again, let's look at this. If I take this and move it, you can see that I've selected one of the sub-hierarchies, and so I would press Shift and G to then select the whole parent, and now I get that whole thing that I can move around or rotate as I need to. And in a video to follow this up, we're going to look at library overrides and referenced objects, which is sort of another layer past this.